Hello and welcome to Eastern Roman history. An empire does not last 1,000 years without an army, and the Eastern Roman Empire is no exception. Despite a lack of interest by Byzantine historians in Eastern Roman military history until recently, an essential part of understanding the Eastern Roman military must come from learning how it changed over the many centuries that it operated. As the development of the Byzantine army spanned over 1,000 years, to make a satisfactory video of it all, while still being detailed and informative, would be impossible to do in a single video, unless it was several hours long. As such, I have divided it into the main phases of the Byzantine military, from Diocletian to Constantine XI. Why Diocletian? Simply because the main reform of the Roman army into the late Roman army came under Diocletian and further developed by Constantine the Great. It was the army of Diocletian that formed the bedrock of what the Roman military looked like until its reform under Constans II in the 7th century, giving it a span of nearly 400 years. This video deals with the period from Diocletian to Zeno, because the army of the Roman Empire was, with only minor changes, constant throughout this period in terms of its development. After the end of the 3rd century crisis, Diocletian restored the size of the army to number around 400,000 troops and sailors. John the Lydian says there were 389,704 soldiers and 45,562 sailors. Such a precise number, I believe, endears itself to be taken as accurate. To do this, Diocletian introduced conscription by giving taxpayers two choices. Either they could enlist in the army or contribute to upkeeping their comrades through a monetary tax. To ensure a regular supply of new recruits, Diocletian decreed that soldiers' sons inherited the obligation of enlisting. To pay for the army and all its necessities, equipment, food, uniforms, etc. were requisitioned by the government and then given to the army. This was called the Annona Militari. The Tetrarchy itself was a military innovation because, with multiple emperors, they could conduct several campaigns at once. This also removed the threat of entrusting commanders with large armies that could proclaim themselves emperor. The empire was administratively divided into east and west, meaning the 4 emperors could focus on their own areas, with 2 in the east and 2 in the west. Diocletian created regional commands under a dux. A dux commanded mainly infantry, some cavalry, and, where there were wide enough rivers, fleets as well. The emperor replaced the military function fulfilled by the Praetorian Guard with their own personal army of Palatine regiments, the Herculani and the Joviani. The army was divided into limitane, or garrison soldiers, and comitatenses, who were stationed at the frontier as well. These were professional field armies that could be more mobile and meet major threats, whereas the limitane were more attenuated for dealing with more minor threats and holding the frontier. This arrangement proved very effective against multiple enemies. Following the Tetrarchate civil wars, Constantine the Great disbanded the Praetorian Guard and created a new cavalry corps called the Schollae as a personal bodyguard. Constantine drew the comitatenses from the frontiers and stationed them in HQs around the empire. Some were to follow the emperor as praesentales, an army in the emperor's presence. The removal of the professional soldiers from the frontiers clearly made the distinction between the limitane, now frontier militia soldiers, and comitatenses, which was the professional mobile field army. The army probably increased in size under his reign, but not by 10 times as John the Lydian claimed. When Constantine elevated his sons and nephew to the rank of Caesar, they were each assigned a Magister Peditum and a Magister Equitum, or Master of Footmen and Master of Cavalry. In the reigns of Constantius II and Constans I, 2 masters of cavalry and infantry were assigned to all of the field armies, such as the Army of Africa as well as the Praesentales. The military remained as it was, with ducates of Limitani protecting the frontiers and the field armies marching to meet any incursions and being led on foreign expeditions from Julian the Apostate until the disastrous Battle of Adrianople in 378. However, a social change that occurred was that the Limitani became second class to the comitatenses. In 372, Valens and Valentinian I decreed that recruits that were not strong or tall enough for the field army were to enlist as frontier soldiers. See Theodosian Code 7:22-8. This reflects the reality that although the Limitani could deal with bandits and small raids, they were no match for a proper army such as the Goths or Huns. Theodosius the Great, due to the massive loss of troops at Adrianople, needed to recruit more men. Theodosius relied on large numbers of barbarians to fill up the ranks, including Goths, to deal with the Gothic threat. Under Theodosius, the Master of Infantry and Master of Cavalry were combined into a single Magister Militum, or Master of Soldiers. This placed field armies, such as the Army of Thrace, under the command of a single man. Having dealt with the Goths, Foederati, barbarian troops under their own commanders in Roman service, became far more prominent and utilised by Theodosius I to defeat first Magnus Maximus and later Eugenius. After defeating Magnus Maximus in 388, Theodosius used Western soldiers to expand the Praesentale army of the East. He then divided them into 2 equal halves. By 395, the eastern half of the empire had 5 field armies: the East, Illyricum, Thrace, and the 2 Praesentales. They also had 15 ducates of Limitane. In addition, they had the large army of Egypt, indefinitely considered a field army or a special ducate of the Nile. In 399, the Gothic commander of the Praesentales, Gainas, seized control of Constantinople, but after a few months was kicked out. He was caught and executed by the Huns, and his 7,000 troops were massacred in Constantinople. From that point on, Germans were largely kept out of the Roman high command in the east. However, Romanized barbarians such as Asper, the son of Ardeba the Elder, had risen to the rank of Magister Militum. Asper was effectively Generalissimo of the east, as much as Aetius or Rissimo were in the west. This meant that Asper and the court were effectively in charge of foreign policy rather than the emperor, except in specific instances. To counter this, Leo the Great recruited many Isaurians into the army and high command to counter Asper and his Germanic comrades. The Isaurians, despite being part of the Roman Empire for centuries, were still a warlike people, addicted to banditry, and were considered by the court at Constantinople as barbarous as the other barbarians. The pinnacle of Leo I's policy to challenge the Germans was his appointment of Tarassus, the Isaurian chief, later the Emperor Zeno, as Count of the Excubators. The Excubators were a new imperial bodyguard created by Leo the Great in the 460s. During Zeno's reign, all recruitment into the military was monitored by the government in Constantinople. See Justinian Code 12:35-17. This may have been to control the number of barbarians entering the army and the quality of the men being recruited. Ironic, since Zeno was considered a barbarian. For much of the 4th century, before the Battle of Adrianople, the Roman army was competent enough to defeat every foe that it faced, both foreign and Roman. After Valens's fatal blunder at Adrianople, foederati were used to fill in the gaps left, and then for much of the 5th century, the Eastern Court held an internal battle over whether military power would be held by a barbarian or by a Roman. Unlike in the West, the result of this fight, thanks to Arcadius, Leo I, and Anastasius I was to keep barbarians out of the seat of power. I have been your host, Daniel Maynard. Please do like, subscribe and share this video, and this has been Eastern Roman History.